Other contributors include C3 AI. C3 AI software enables organizations to use artificial intelligence at enterprise scale, solving previously unsolvable problems. C3 AI is enterprise AI.
Welcome to Friday. Yeah, welcome to Week in Review. Bill Radke here. I'm going to be your host for the next hour where, we get together at the end of the week and discuss what happened this week, figure out the important bits, catch you up in a pretty quick way. And I do it with some skilled and experienced and I'm going to say likable journalists from around the area. We've got Publicola editor and publisher Erica Barnett back with us. Hi, Erica.
Hey, Bill.
Nice to see you. Everett Herald Cities reporter Isabella Breda. Welcome back, Isabella.
Hey, how's it going?
It's good, thanks. Good to see you too. Tacoma News Tribune's reporter and Metro News columnist Matt Driscoll. Matt, thanks for coming on the show today.
Absolutely, Bill. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking at them on my computer screen, and so can you, because we live stream the show. You can go to YouTube or Facebook, and you just search KOW Public Radio. You might think at first glance that Erica and Isabella and I are in black and white. We're actually not. It's just that Matt pops so much with that sunshine yellow that it just makes the rest of us look gray. It's beautiful. Thank you, Matt.
It's just bringing out my youthful complexion here, which is fading away very quickly.
Indeed. Well, we're going to someday be able to see more of one another's complexions, whatever they're like, because here's what happened this week. Right now, of course, statewide rule is that businesses and schools have to require a mask. It's been that way for most of the last year and a half. That rule is going to go away in a month. Governor Inslee just said he's going to drop the indoor mask mandate on March 21st.
I know that there are some people who feel that it should have been ended earlier. I also know that there's a lot of people who think it maybe is ending too soon. And everyone is entitled to their opinion about this.
Oh, thanks, Governor. Erica Barnett, Inslee, I watched the news conference. He had numbers, he had charts, falling case rates, hospitalizations declining. So why, but you told me you thought this was actually more about bowing to pressure. Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, look, he said it right then. There are people who thought that it should have happened sooner. And I think that, there has been a lot of pressure, not just from Republicans, but from a weary public at large to lift some of the requirements, not just the mask mandate, but the requirement that you show your vaccine card at the entrance to some businesses. And I think the first day of spring is a lovely day to stop wearing your mask in theory. But I do wonder if the science is going to continue to support this kind of fantastical notion that we are through COVID. Omicron was a new variant. There could still be more new variants. And I'm wondering if we're going to have, a very fleeting hot back spring, sort of like we had a very fleeting hot back summer last year.
Well, before we hear from Isabella and Matt, Erica, all the officials there, the school superintendent and all those types did say we're not done with the pandemic, and if things get bad again, then we'll change the rule again. But do you think ending the indoor mask mandate at this point makes that much, much, much harder if that were to happen, if a variant new variant comes?
I think that 2 years into the pandemic, we're a lot tireder now as a society than we were even last summer. So I do think it's going to make it harder politically to go back to sort of where we are now and where we were before. It'll be really interesting to see how many people continue wearing masks. I go to the gym and I've gotten used to working out while masked. I haven't gotten sick in 2 years, which has been fantastic. Not even a cold. So I will, at least I'm saying right now that I'll continue wearing a mask, but look, if everybody stops, I mean, who knows what I'll be saying in a month or two.
Right. Isabella, you're at the Everett Herald. How are things looking in Snohomish County?
Well, I'm kind of with Erica on personally feeling like I still want to wear a mask because I haven't got a cold either myself. But we did see, as things relaxed over the summer and people weren't worried about this looming variant to the degree that they are now, or just what we came off of, people are tired and they didn't want to put them back on when that mask mandate was reinstated and when students had to go back to school and wear masks. And that's where we saw those massive protests, like in Snohomish County. They were pretty much going strong. There were nurses protesting vaccine mandates. And so I have all these vivid memories of the whole summer. So, well, I don't see a complete return to normal. As I said, COVID is still here and very real. I also see that, as we're lifting this mask mandate, if it's to come back at any point, then there's going to be an equal amount of resistance. We're going to see the same cycle perpetuate over and over.
Matt, Isabella mentioned resistance and protests. Do you think this is, you are in Pierce County, do you think this is the beginning of the end of protests? Because you might not like that it's another month or so away, but you can see that it's not a forever mandate.
Right. I mean, I think Erica is right to some extent about the pressure playing a role in this. I mean, clearly here in Pierce County, a lot of people are done with it. They've been done with it for a long time. And, you look around the neighboring states, and neighboring states are being done with it. And so I think it's becoming increasingly hard to kind of hold that line. Whether I think this is the end of protests, I kind of doubt it. I think that the likelihood of a new variant comeback tour, if you will, is pretty high. I think we're likely to be in a similar situation in the future. And kind of, even if that doesn't happen, I think one of the things we've seen over the course of the last 2 years is kind of pushback to these mandates and pushback to some of these public health measures has really kind of solidified and kind of attracted, I think, a group of people that has some, discontent with government in general. And so whether it manifests as mask mandate protests or vaccine protests or some other form, I think now it's been kind of tapped into, and I doubt it's just going away altogether.
Yeah, it's going to be at some point local government by local government. King County has not yet said whether they're going to keep a mask mandate, an indoor mandate past March 21st. Schools is going to be really interesting as the statewide rule lifts and these local health boards and school districts are making these decisions. Already, schools in Richland and Kettle Falls have just they went mask optional this week, even though they're not allowed to do that. What is the state doing about that? Does anybody know? Is it just a warning letter? That's all I've heard so far. I think the Richland schools shut down for a couple of days. And then we were talking about everybody's personal decisions. A listener named Lisa wrote to me and said her 5-year-old is vaccinated. Her 1-year-old can't be yet. And she said, quote, "All I want is my youngest to have the same care, the same respect." Why is the state not waiting when it comes to schools? Now we're talking about some kids who are very young, and school students might have not only immunocompromised or elderly housemates, but maybe little babies on board who haven't had the chance. Why is the state going to leave it district to district, and how do you think that's going to play out?
I think that's something we see unique to Washington State too, that there's a need for local control. I mean, districts as tiny as one's out in Index, where there's only 30 students, they have their own school board, they pass their own levies, they retain that local control. So that's something that's really important to folks in education across the state. But it sounds like, as we're allowing these school boards to make these decisions, which aren't always rooted in science, they might be rooted in that pressure that Erica was citing the governor was feeling from those parents that marched into school board meetings over the summer and said, we need to give our kids medical freedom and they shouldn't be wearing masks in classes. And on the flip side, we have parents who are very much counting on those school boards to make decisions that are going to protect their students and therefore their families as they come home, and they might have family members who are immunocompromised. I talked to a parent out on the Tulalip Reservation that was describing when Omicron was surging that, his biggest fear is that his kids that weren't old enough to get vaccinated were going to go get sick and bring it home and infect his whole family, and they had a large family. So these are things that it's kind of scary putting that in the hands of these school board members to make those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's interesting, and the school board aspect of it is kind of interesting. But here in Tacoma, I mean, today we've got a statement out from Tacoma Public Schools, essentially saying they're going to defer to the local health department on what the decision is made. And so I think a lot of it, when we talk about local control, and I think Isabella is exactly right. I think it's going to come down a lot to that kind of district to district, and whether they're going to kind of agree with whatever the recommendation is from local health departments. And another factor in this, I think that we probably don't talk enough about is the influence of teacher unions. I mean, how comfortable are they in classes without masks? Is that something they feel good about? I mean, obviously unions exist for a reason, and those sorts of protections and conversations are really important. So, I mean, I've actually been somewhat surprised that there hasn't been more pushback from local teacher unions here in Pierce County about some of the returns to school, and especially when Omicron was raging, whether they felt okay with that. Apparently they did, but I think that's another kind of layer to this decision, and how school districts will make it, is just the comfort level with teachers.
I asked my kids if it becomes optional. I've got a 15-year-old and two 11-year-olds. Do they want to keep wearing masks? And they all said that they're going to keep wearing them. They're just, that's their bent, that's their style. But I have a feeling that they will be closely following the metric known as peer pressure. It's going to be interesting how that starts to change. I feel it. I'm 56 and I feel peer pressure, Yes.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's the metric we all follow, right? I mean, yeah. I feel like I'm definitely for sure going to be wearing my mask at the gym, but I mean, it is very annoying to wear a mask at the gym. For a long time, I wore a mask outdoors, even though I knew there was, I mean, the science, the health experts were all saying it doesn't matter, just because everybody else was doing it and I didn't want to get glared at.
Yeah.
Yeah. I must say, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's silly and ridiculous to act like wearing a mask is some sort of oppression, in the middle of a pandemic, because it's not. So I have zero sympathy for kind of the anti-mask side. But when we're talking about going in the stores, one thing I'm going to look forward to someday, hopefully, is not being immediately able to identify, who has completely different politics than me, or, who believes in vaccines or who believes in masks and doesn't. It's, it kind of weighs on your psyche after a while to kind of have those divides so obvious and so in front of people. So, as silly as it sounds, I am looking forward to a day when, not those constant reminders every time I go to Fred Meyer.
Right. It's tiring. What about vaccine requirements? King County said this week that they're dropping the indoor vaccine requirement on March 1st. So that's just a couple of weeks from now. Restaurants and bars, theaters, gyms will not have to check your vaccination status. Individual businesses, though, can keep their own, whatever rules they want. And the head of the big restaurant group, the Washington Hospitality Association, talked about that choice. And I'm going to find it in just a moment. Here's talking about a case-by-case, business-by-business decision on vax requirements.
This will be a big relief for those who this has really put a 20 to 30% dent in, and for those who this has been a positive, hopefully they've built enough culture up that if they enjoy it, they still have that option.
I wonder, what do you think? How many local businesses, and it may be different, King to Pierce to Snohomish, do you figure will keep requiring vaccination checks when they don't have to?
Well, I think in King County, it will perhaps be a little bit higher, but there are reasons. I don't know if I buy that 20 to 30% reductions in revenues resulted directly from asking people for their vaccine cards. I think there are a lot of factors that have contributed to restaurants and bars, not having as many customers as they used to. But, I mean, it's also true that, we have made servers and, hosts and, just people who work in restaurants and retail into bouncers. And they're, they do not get paid enough to be vaccine bouncers. And a lot of times that leads to, unnecessary confrontations. So I can certainly see a business argument and just a kind of workplace conditions argument for getting rid of those mandates. On the other hand, I really like the reassurance of knowing that when I go out, I'm not going to be coughed on by some unvaxxed, unmasked, weirdo who just is among the 30% of people in King County, or in Washington State rather, who don't believe that they need to get vaccinated. So I'm hoping it's going to be a majority still do that, have that requirement. But, I fear that it's, very quickly going to fall off, the same way that I fear that mask usage is going to fall off when it's voluntary.
Well, I mean, from the Pierce County perspective, I guess I'll just add that that's, and I hate to say it, but I mean, that's not really something we've done much of down here. I mean, there are a handful of businesses, a handful of restaurants who are requiring vaccine, but there's been no guidance from the county or cities requiring it. There's been recommendations, pleases, but we haven't really done that. And so, I'm coming to you from Pierce County, which has a much lower vaccination rate than King County, and so certainly down here the calculus has been that for many businesses that it would fear a loss of revenue, a loss of clientele if they were to enact things like that, and so many haven't. A few have, and bless their heart for doing it. But down here in Pierce County, I don't think there's going to be really any change.
Isabella, Snohomish County, checking your vax requirement at the door?
Yeah, I see some of those businesses that have had it in place as soon as it sort of became an emerging thing that you could do. As soon as everyone was eligible to get vaccinated, I see those people hanging on to it as long as they can. And on the flip side of that, when Erica was talking about business owners and people working in restaurants being bouncers and having to take on that role, there have been people living in Snohomish County talking about how easy it is to get a hold of a fake vaccine card. So there's also that side of it too that might not be factored in as much. So yeah, I see a lot of the smaller businesses that have clung on to that just because of their ideological beliefs or their trust in science to continue hanging on to those requirements.
Well, that was the announcement from this week. King County not making businesses check vaccine requirements at the door starting March 1st. And then the big statewide announcement from Governor Inslee saying that the indoor mask mandate goes away in a little more than a month from now, March 21st. A couple other, before we leave COVID, just some little bits and pieces of news. Microsoft is reopening offices at the end of this month. Amazon relaxing mask mandates for workers. 35% of City of Seattle employees who work from home will be back in the office mid-March. Seattle's eviction moratorium ends in a week and a half, and criminal trials have started up again at King County Superior Court. As we keep tracking the progress of this pandemic, did we cover it? Any COVID notes before we take a break and move on with more news topics?
I think we hit it all.
We hit the big
Got
stuff. All right. Well, we'll see. And coming up, we're going to continue on Week in Review. You can watch it. You can really enjoy Matt's yellow background as I am, or you could feel more muted as we are in three other boxes as you go to YouTube or Facebook and search KUOW Public Radio. Bill Radke here with you. We've got Erica Barnett and Matt Driscoll and Isabella Breda coming back right after this quick break with more Week in Review.
1224 KUOW. I'm Guy Nelson, and it's great to have you with us on this Friday during the noon hour. We're glad you're a fan of Week in Review with Bill Radke, and it happens because of listener contributors just like yourself. They make everything you hear possible at KUOW and keep this important service strong for you. So we're here to help you make sense of the confusing news of the week, and that this conversation is based on factual information, and that's why you can trust it. You can make a gift online at KUOW and support this programming right now, and we'd appreciate that. KUOW.org/donate. Thanks so much.
Support for KUOW comes from Valentine Roofing, reminding homeowners to get 3 bids when planning for any home improvement project. Window replacement may help increase the energy efficiency and comfort of the home. More information on roof replacements, windows, and gutters can be found at valentineroof.com.
You're hearing local journalists from across the Puget Sound area tell you about some of the big stuff that happened this week and swapping points of view and information on it. We've got from Tacoma News Tribune, Matt Driscoll is here, Everett Herald's Isabella Breda, and Publicola's Erica Barnett. And I'm Bill Radke. Let's keep at it now. This week, some local corporations and philanthropists said that they're going to spend $10 million addressing homelessness in downtown Seattle.
Downtown is home to the largest concentration of unsheltered folks in the county. It is one of the largest concentrations of folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness in this country.
That's King County's homelessness czar, Mark Dones, saying with new money from Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, the Gates Foundation, Steve Ballmer's foundation, his goal is to bring the number of people living outside downtown from about 1,000 to fewer than 30. Erica, did he say when that, or did they say when that's going to happen? And do you think that's realistic?
Well, the plan is to do that, is to accomplish that goal for the most part within a year using peer navigators, which are a specialized kind of caseworker with a lived experience. And do I think it's realistic? Well, we'll see. I mean, I think it depends on, how sort of draconian the county is willing to be and the city is willing to be about keeping people from sort of moving back into downtown after assuming the kind of removal through sheltering people plan actually works. I think it's pretty optimistic considering, as Mark Dones noted, downtown is the biggest concentration of people experiencing homelessness in the state. And, and it's the discharge point for, it's both a huge concentration of shelters and various kinds of services, feeding programs, but it's also the discharge point for Harborview, for the jail. And so for the sobering center, for all kinds of, places that eject people directly back into homelessness. So I do think it's worth noting that this $10 million contribution is one time. So the city, and the county will have to either pick it up or stop the program after a year. Most likely they're going to pick it back up. And also because it's funded by a lot of the same corporations that are downtown. It's focused on one neighborhood. And so the question then is, if all the focus becomes on downtown Seattle, what happens in all the other neighborhoods in Seattle where we're also seeing homelessness?
Yeah. Again, right before we hear from Isabella and Matt, are you saying there's still not anytime soon going to be enough shelter or housing? So that means chasing people around more than it does helping them?
Well, the latest count that the regional authority did of people who are homeless in King County found that there are between 40 and 45,000 people, about half of whom are unsheltered in King County on any, at any point during a year. So optimistically, there may be a couple thousand new shelter and housing units combined coming online in the next year. But I mean, this plan does not include any money, not a penny for new housing. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to necessarily involve pushing people around because there's just not going to be enough housing units for, shelter, much less housing units for the number of people that cycle through downtown in the course of a year.
What about Snohomish or Pierce points of view and reactions to all of this and directions going on in your counties? Isabella, do you want to begin?
Sure, yeah. Well, something that stood out to me that Erica talked about was kind of this concentration in downtown and not focusing on other neighborhoods in Seattle. On a different scale, that's happening in Snohomish County, where a lot of the resources have been focused in Everett or North and East County cities. In Snohomish County, figure, well, the resources are in Everett, so we'll give them access, unhoused people access to buses to get to Everett, and we don't have to deal with the problem here. Like their focus is so much on reducing visible homelessness, whatever that really means. And there's really no congregate shelters available in North County. And so there needs to be a more holistic approach to be able to understand, where people live, what resources they need in that area, and being able to address regional issues rather than, again, trying to just put all the resources in one place when they're already spread so thin. So very similar issues up here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, both Erica and Isabella's points kind of resonate with the perspective down here. First, it's just always striking to me how similar, but on a smaller scale, the debates that we see in Seattle are to the debates we see in cities like Tacoma, and I'm assuming Everett too. I mean, right here we're grappling with the same sorts of things, just on a smaller scale. After 2 years of the pandemic and essentially not really doing any sort of sweeps, for lack of a better term, and grappling with the Boise decision. There are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of residents.
I should say the Boise decision. Would you briefly explain that?
Sure, yeah, of course. Essentially just a ruling that found it unconstitutional to essentially criminalize people for being homeless, or criminalize people for life-sustaining activities that you have to conduct while homeless or unhoused. So there's a lot of frustration down here, and we're grappling with that too. We much like in Seattle, we've got an upstart group of business owners who are kind of trying to rally around increased police presence, increased sweeping of camps. We've got a ostensibly progressive city council that's trying to deal with these things. So it's all very complicated, and it's all very similar, just on a smaller scale. And also, to Isabella's point, I mean, Tacoma has historically been the hub of homeless-related services in Pierce County, and that's been the situation for a long time. For a long time, the county's response has essentially been homelessness is someone else's problem, and that has fallen on Tacoma. Now, recently, there's kind of been a switch of tenor on the Pierce County Council, where they have kind of adopted a comprehensive plan to end homelessness, another plan to end homelessness. But that is kind of providing a bright light, or some reason for optimism to see some potential of a regional approach. But it's just always striking to me how we make Seattle out to be this outlier where the homelessness is this huge issue. And really, I think we see these debates just on a smaller scale in cities around the region.
You mentioned policing there, a separate issue from homelessness, but the mayor of Seattle was talking about policing this week, saying he's launching a police hiring campaign.
Even if you're watching today and interested in helping make our city more safe and just and supportive, please reach out. We are hiring.
Erica, is that a step away from, or another step away from defunding the police?
Well, I think that it's kind of just restating what is already happening, which is that the city has a target of 125 new officers this year. They were funded last year by the city council. And so that's kind of the optimistic goal. I think that to say we are hiring and to actually hire police officers are two different things. And the city's had a huge problem recruiting officers, like every major city around the country has in the last couple of years. So there was some controversy with the hiring bonuses. The former mayor Jenny Durkin authorized perhaps extra legally for hiring bonuses to continue into this year, which they did. And then when the Harrell administration found out, they canceled them. But there's always a possibility that they will try to extend those, which may provide some kind of boost to hiring. But I think, we'll see what actually happens with those 125 officers. That would be more than have been hired in any of the last couple of years.
Anything else on policing directions? Local policies, homelessness, crime prevention, just checking in on with Pierce and Snohomish counties, and then back to Seattle area, what's going on?
So I think we're seeing increasingly that police departments are also realizing their role in working with cities and providing those like embedded social worker programs, because they're the people who have boots on the ground, for lack of a better word. And are out there in the community. And again, this goes back to what I was talking about, is there being limited resources in some of the more rural parts of the county. A lot of the city councils and mayors point to, that they're moving in the right direction by getting an embedded social worker that's out there building relationships with some of those unhoused folks and trying to connect them with the resources, though limited, that do exist. And Edmonds is the last city to be coming around and adding an embedded social worker, which was actually something that was kind of up in the air. As they recently elected this more conservative-leaning city council that was kind of picking apart the human services division and whether or not they wanted to cut a third of their budget just as they're ramping up these efforts. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the next few years.
Down here we've been doing similar things. Certainly not on a large enough scale, but in Tacoma we've got what's referred to as the hot team. It's police that work alongside social workers when they're addressing issues related to homelessness. But I mean, one thing that I think is important to kind of note is a lot of times in the public discourse and certainly in the raging public debate, the connection between homelessness and crime, I think, is overstated or stated as fact. And I think there's a lot of reason to question that. There's the study, I believe it's out of Oxford, that's drawing on the Seattle Pacific University information that shows that the size of encampments is not directly correlated to an increase in crime. Now, there's a lot of variables in that, and I don't think that puts the issue to bed by any means. But certainly down here in Tacoma, we're seeing discussion that's essentially homelessness equals crime, and I think we need to be really kind of careful about drawing that distinction because they're not the same thing.
One more thing before yes, go ahead.
Sorry. To Matt's point, I think that's a starting point for a lot of cities too, is trying to change the discourse around what homelessness really looks like and addressing the fact that it's people who are in need of just getting their basic needs met. And it seems sort of militant to begin with using the police department to try to solve those issues, as a lot of times they become agitators in those situations. So that's why they're starting with maybe adding that embedded social worker, but on a greater scale, getting together homelessness task force. So they may be ineffective in some of the smaller cities, but having people who have experience, either lived experience living outside or just working with those who are unhoused and getting them connected to resources like people who've been in social work, be able to really look at, again, holistically people's situations and moving away from that militant approach, like Matt was saying, that there might be some assumption that homelessness and crime go hand in hand, which is obviously not true.
Eric, I started off talking about this new money from some of the big local corporations and philanthropists. Did I understand you right on Publicola to say that in a way there's a problem with the amount of money these new peer navigators are going to be making? Would you explain that?
Well, yeah. I mean, the issue there is not that they would be making too much money. The estimate that the authority gave me was around $75,000 for the peer navigators, and then their supervisors will make, the job description says between 100 and 130,000. I don't think those are outrageous salaries, but they are much, much higher than what people doing equivalent work on the streets right now, like law enforcement assisted diversion, Just Care, the Downtown Emergency Service Center. You just go down the line of all the outreach providers, which include people with lived experience. They're making, maybe 45,000 a year. And so it creates this two-tiered system where the government workers are making a lot more than the nonprofits that are paid by the government. So, potentially, I mean, those folks already have a huge problem retaining workers, recruiting workers, because the pay is so bad. And so now you've got the secondary system where you can make almost twice as much. It just, it creates the potential for some really bad outcomes where there's just a further drain of employees from this parallel nonprofit system. They're all funded by the same people.
And it doesn't raise the bar and bring pay up other places?
That would be wonderful, but there's no funding for that. I mean, that is something that Mark Jones did talk about at today's press conference and said, we want to lift the bar and we don't think that it's okay that people are paid so poorly. But, the concern that I heard from providers is that, the government always pays itself first. And so we'll believe it when we see it. And right now the funding is only for those peer navigators. And they're talking about, maybe raising the bar for providers that work downtown. But again, there's a lot of other neighborhoods besides downtown in Seattle, and there's providers working in those neighborhoods too. So It's a question of fairness.
On another topic, we're doing week in review here with Erica. That's Erica Barnett, Matt Driscoll, Isabella Breda, and we were just telling you, I think it was last week, about making single family zoned neighborhoods denser, allowing duplexes, triplexes, mother-in-law apartments, as they're called, backyard cottages. Some city residents opposed that. So the legislature was maybe going to force the issue, require that to happen statewide in some places. But the bill failed this week. The Snohomish County Housing Authority's Chris Collier supported the bill and said that most local politicians wanted it, but they can't say so.
They have observed the punishment that is laid upon local elected leaders, that dare to suggest that the city should not be in final and total control over land use decisions within the city limits. On the contrary, elected leaders that get out in front of this at the legislature and speak in opposition, they know such price. In fact, they are given kudos by the community that is fearful of change.
Isabella, is that just a pro-density spin, or do you think local politicians secretly wanted to be told what to do? And if so, why did it fail at the state level?
Well, I'd say it certainly depends on where you're looking. There are some cities around that have been working closely with the housing authority to try to develop different ways to tackle housing issues. And a lot of that is looking at breaking out of this mold where we need 60% single family housing. We need to preserve our neighborhoods. But again, that has to get down to city council members, constituents. And a lot of people don't want to lose the not in my backyard NIMBY folks when there's an election coming up. And I think we saw a lot of that here in Snohomish County in the most recent election, when people running for city council were afraid to comment on, looking at zoning and trying to come up with creative options to expand housing options, and density being one of those. And, when accessory dwelling units came up in Edmond City Council meetings over the summer, that was something that they had, I think up to an hour of public comment pushing back on, just something as simple as that. So I'd say it's kind of a mixed bag up here. There are some cities that are pretty, adamant about getting moving because the housing market's only getting more challenging. And again, if we're connecting this with homelessness, the best way to prevent homelessness is create more affordable housing. But like I said, I just don't think there's quite enough support from local governments across the board. It's way too much of a mixed bag.
And Matt, the main pushback, well, for one thing, opponents call this upzoning a giveaway to developers, and also say it's just going to bring in expensive new housing, and housing won't get more affordable. But what's your take in Pierce County on the same debate, local versus state too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of fascinated by this, honestly, and it's for a couple of reasons. But one is because Tacoma, for the last year or more, and time is all weird now in the pandemic, so it could be 2 years for all I know. But we've been going through a process of re-examining our zoning with a specific goal of creating more density, right? Like, I think we realize that we're in a housing crisis, and these things are related to homelessness, and people are getting pushed out, and neighborhoods are getting gentrified, and so that's something we need to address, right? And so we've gone through this long process that involves all the public comments and all the long meetings and all the name calling. And what has come out of that would be a big improvement over where things, initially stood, at least, in terms of creating density. But during that process, speaking to the clip you played, what has happened is it has gotten watered down along the way. You see a little carve out here, a little carve out here. Maybe this is a historic neighborhood. Maybe this view matters. And so it's the end product ends up being, less density than what was originally proposed. And so I think there's, to the point of the clip, I think there's an element of truth to that. I mean, we were in an ed board meeting with Governor Inslee, who was a proponent of this bill. It was either late last year or early this year. And he basically said, look, I'm comfortable being the bad guy on this. Local politicians get too much heat when they propose these things. It gets too hot, they get watered down. If someone needs to be a bad guy on this, if the state needs to be the bad guy, I'm comfortable with that. And so I think there probably are a lot of at least progressive politicians who would like the state to step in. But of course, the other side of that is allowing local control. Tacoma was a proponent of allowing that local control since we had gone through this process. But you allow local control, that goes both ways, and a lot of cities can say we're not interested in doing that.
Erica, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Seattle, local control largely failed, and in a lot of other cities too. I mean, and so I think this was an effort to say, look, we're gonna take it out of your hands, but at a very sort of gentle density level, right? I mean, the most dense that the bill ever was I think 6 plexes, within a half mile of transit in some areas. And so it got watered down to where it was, I think, 4 plexes within a quarter mile walking distance of frequent transit that comes every 15 minutes. So that excludes almost everywhere. Even in a city like Seattle. I was looking at a map of Magnolia, and I figured out that the only place you could actually build anything under the bill that died, the watered down bill, would be in the middle of the BNSF train tracks. quarter mile away from the rapid ride on 15th Avenue. So it was a pretty lousy bill by the time it died. But I think it speaks to actually probably the solution is going to have to come at the local level, because the state level, every single Republican was against it. Did they actually all intellectually oppose the idea of, allowing more density and, quote unquote giveaways to developers? I don't know, probably not, but they're always going to vote as a block on this stuff. So, that leaves Democrats, a lot of Democrats, including North Seattle Rep. Jerry Pollitt, oppose density, really want to protect single family areas. And so I think it actually will be more effective in the long run to try to bring this back to a local level and try to actually do it. At least speaking just for Seattle, I think it'll be more effective to try to do it at the city council level than the state level, because we've seen what the result was this year.
Hey, since we're talking about the legislature now and Democrats and Republicans, do you mind if I pick up on something pandemic related that we didn't get to in the first section, which is our governor can keep emergency orders going without the legislature having a role. And there was an attempt to limit those powers. What happened with that? Is it only Republicans trying to change that? Who can explain what's happening with our governor's, like it or not, emergency power?
Well, not everyone all at once, I suppose. I'm by no means an expert, but essentially, there's been pushback on both sides to the idea of emergency powers and kind of these emergency proclamations lasting forever. You had two kind of versions of that in Olympia. One was from Democrats, the one that was advanced, which is much lighter than the one that Republicans oppose. Essentially, it means that when they're not in session, the four leaders of each chamber could come together and end a mask mandate or something like that. The thing about this for me is, intellectually and kind of in a vacuum, academically, the case that Republicans are making makes sense. I do think it's been 2 years. I do think that the checks and balances that we normally kind of expect out of government haven't been there. And so I can sympathize that in a vacuum. The problem with that is you can't untangle that kind of academic debate from the reality that we're really talking about pandemic response, right? And when you look at pandemic response, the things since fairly early on that the Republicans and conservatives have been pushing have been, wrong compared to what has come out of Inslee. And so it's hard for me to have a lot of sympathy for Republicans who say they deserve a seat at the table, although intellectually and academically, I think they probably do for the way government is supposed to function. And just one more point on this, I don't think it's purely selfless, the argument they're making. I think they know they would lose if there was a debate on the mask mandate or something like this. I think one of the things they're trying to do is, and I think they'll say it, is get Democrats to vote on these things, get Democrats on the record on these things. And I think one could argue that might have campaign potentially advantages down the road. So intellectually,
it fires up in their own districts. It
Right.
fires up their base to be talking about emergency powers.
Right. Or, if you've got a Democrat on record who voted for the mask mandate or voted for school closures or voted for whatever it is. I think that's something that people can run on. We saw that. It's not the only element of that, but from the San Francisco school board story that we've seen with the recall down there. These pandemic restrictions are, they're a divisive issue, and, divisive issues can be politically advantageous.
I would note too that, declaring an emergency, this is as Matt pointed out, this is a really extraordinary situation. But in this case, declaring an emergency, and this is true in all 50 states. Every governor declared an emergency. I believe I could be wrong about that, but in most of the states, at any rate, declared an emergency, extended it beyond 90 days, obviously. And that opened up resources. And, part of declaring an emergency is often, getting resources from the federal government, getting resources from the state. In Seattle, we have a state of emergency on homelessness. And so, I think that to sort of take that power away and to allow it to be rescinded at any moment really would have, potential unintended consequences beyond just, the Republicans can get mad and get rid of the mask mandate. And so I think that I actually think that Inslee has used it pretty judiciously and in a very extraordinary situation. And as we've seen, has also bowed to political pressure by doing what he did just the other day, getting rid of the mask mandate. So I don't feel that the checks and balances have been so extraordinarily overrun that we need to, do away with this power altogether, which I think effectively this would do, or would have the potential to do.
Isabella, did we cover it? Anything to add? Emergency
Sure.
powers?
I kind of just want to piggyback off of what Erica said, is that it's kind of, hiding behind the facade of, we want checks and balances, but ultimately, as Matt brought up too, it is an ability to take a look and peel back the layers and see how different legislators actually feel on these issues, if there was that ability to vote and take over that control. But yeah.
So this is a watered down version. We said this is not. The proposal is not that the governor's emergency order would end automatically after 90 days. It would be that the legislative leaders would have to come together, if they weren't already in session, would have to come together they have a chance to end it if they want to. Otherwise, it persists. And is that proposal still alive in the legislature?
Yeah, that's the bill. The Democrat version of that is the one that advanced.
Yeah, that's still alive. Okay. So thank you for that. Thank you for explaining that. And we are going to come right back, and we're going to go to the library, and we are going to smile simultaneously here at the end of Week in Review. We're going to come right back with Erica Barnett and Isabella Breda and Matt Driscoll. Don't go away.
Support for KUOW comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
It's 12:52 KUOW Seattle. Thanks for joining us on this Friday afternoon. World news from the BBC is coming up at 1 o'clock. Stay with us.
Support for KUOW comes from Seattle Shakespeare Company, performing Shakespeare, Drum and Colors, 2 plays in repertory, Hamlet and As You Like It, featuring a company of people of color. Learn more at seattleshakespeare.org.
I'm Bill Radke. Thanks for joining us here on Week in Review, listening, yes, also perhaps watching us on YouTube or Facebook. You just search KUOW Public Radio there. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left in the show, so I want to leave people, as always, with something to smile about. Erica, I just wanted to touch on the impending choice of chief librarian for the city of Seattle. You wrote about how, among other things, one of the differences between the 2 chief librarian candidates is that one of them is running a library system without living in that system's city or county or state. What's going on?
So one of the finalists for the chief librarian, as you said, is a guy named Chad Helton. He is the head of the Hennepin County Library. I believe he's on leave now, actually, but until recently, he was running the library system from his home in Los Angeles. And the county actually ended up passing a law that would prohibit, or that does prohibit, any director of a department that is public facing, that deals with the public. So like, I assume the police department, homelessness, things like that, and library, from living outside the state. So it was pretty controversial. In the Minneapolis based Star Tribune has done a lot of coverage of how controversial it was. During his interview last week, Helton said, with the library board, Helton said that he didn't really see the need to live in the state because everybody was working remotely anyway. And he expressed some regret that his staff didn't know about it until later on, I guess, when it became public in the media. But, he said he didn't really have any regrets, and that, it was his prerogative. He does say he would live here if he is appointed to this position.
It's a relatable thing. And I had heard about that. I hadn't heard until I read it from you that the interim chief librarian also doesn't live in Seattle or King County, but lives in Bonnie Lake.
Yeah, Tom Fay is the interim, and he's the other finalist for the position. He lives in Bonnie Lake. Now, he has sort of pointedly done his interviews, all his public appearances, from the Central Library, or a very close facsimile. It sure looks like it. And he said that, he does find it really important to be out in the community and not to actually commute into work. I don't know how much he's been doing that during the pandemic, but yeah, he doesn't live in Seattle either, but he does live inside the state of Washington, which is more than one can say for Helton and his current position.
And you can read about other differences between these two candidates and where they'd like to take the library system. Erica has written about it at Publicola. And we are we're 3 minutes away here for the end of the show. I just want to make sure we're leaving time to give listeners something to smile about. First, I would just like to fact check something Governor Inslee said yesterday. He was asking us to continue to wear our masks indoors until the mandate lifts on March 21st.
People don't quit marathons a quarter mile from the finish line.
They don't quit marathons a quarter mile from the finish line. I just want to say I would absolutely quit a quarter mile from the finish line. I would follow the metrics. How dark is it? How long since everyone's gone home? Did I just wake up in some bushes? It would be a very evidence-based decision depending on the level of cramping and vomiting. I would make that call in consultation with the God who has abandoned me. But what else did we not cover, or is something hopeful that we can take away?
You're asking a bunch of journalists for good news. That's
I know it's a big ask. I get that.
Well, I was just going to make the observation that we now have both a governor and a mayor of Seattle who speak exclusively in sports metaphors. So I don't know who that's good news for. Not for me, a avowed non-sports person, but I do understand a marathon metaphor. So.
Yes, we've talked about the sports balls before, Erica. It comes up every once in a while. I'm with you on that one. Isabella, anything we should or that made you smile this week?
Sure. I couldn't think of anything, and then I remembered last night as I was watching a city council meeting. There was some dead air as they were in a heated debate, and no one wanted to say anything because they were already at that tense point. And one council member had Jeopardy playing in the background, and the Jeopardy theme song just perfectly filled that dead air.
Wow, kismet. Matt, did you smile about anything this week?
Well, I'm going to be sappy, I suppose, but it's our son's 11th birthday today, and there's a chance, since it's a day off in Tacoma Public Schools, he's listening. So happy birthday, August. That always makes me happy to see our son turn 11. But news-wise, I did an interview with a Tacoma t-shirt screen printer on Hilltop. He's had his windows busted out 4 times in about the last month, and it was just really inspiring to hear him talk about the way the community has rallied around him, and the way that local businesses have come together and kind of supported him, and how he sticks it out and loves the Hilltop and has no plans to not be doing it. So that was inspiring. If not smiling, at least it was inspiring.
I read that piece in the News Tribune. That's Matt Driscoll, reporter and Metro News columnist at Tacoma News Tribune. You've been listening to Erica Burnett, editor and publisher at Publicola, and Isabella Breda, cities reporter at the Everett Herald. I really appreciate you all popping on here and telling us what happened this week and figuring out what it means. Thanks for being Week in Review.
Thanks
for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Always good to talk to you. And the reason that you can watch that on YouTube or Facebook is that my colleague Tio Popescu makes that happen. And social media is made possible by Juan Pablo Chiquiza here at KUOW. Kevin Kniestedt produces Week in Review, and we couldn't do it without you. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week. I'm Bill Radke.